Welcome to the Behind the Drapes podcast. I'm your host, Kenny. In today's episode, we're going to be talking to Dr. Shyamal Asher, who's one of the cardiac anesthesiologists here at the Department of Anesthesiology at Rhode Island Hospital. Dr. Asher is probably one of my favorite attendings here, mostly because he's been super supportive of all the things that I've been doing this year, but he's also just a great mentor and a great friend to work with in the operating room. Before coming to Providence, Rhode Island, he was in Chicago where he did his anesthesia residency. Prior to that, he actually went to medical school at Brown University, and that's where he was first inspired to do anesthesia by one of our very own Dr. Rotenberg. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Dr. Asher all about his life story and about how he brought a new life to this world, his son Ian. Stay tuned to see what's going on behind the drapes with Dr. Asher. Because you know you're going to finish with that hill coming up the Capitol.
Yeah, I imagine it's going to be the same. I don't know for sure, but probably
I would think.
So.
I would think so.
Yeah, and it's, hopefully we'll get a bigger contingent from our department.
Right.
I think we do the recruiting.
I think we made it look like fun last year, so.
Yeah, I think we did, and then the thing afterwards was a lot of fun, and
right.
So yeah, hopefully a few more people, and expand beyond just the residents and attendings, and get some other people in there too.
Yeah, great team building. Well, welcome Dr. Shyamal Asher to the podcast.
Thank you.
The very first one.
That's right.
Happy to have you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So marathon talk, that's what we've been talking about. Shyamal was the one who came to me last year and convinced me to do the marathon, even though I had already previously signed up for a marathon the month before. He was like, hey, we got to do this half marathon.
Yeah, I remember that. It was funny. I was in a funny stage in life because I was expecting my baby at the time, and it was almost like a little, midlife crisis I was having. I was like, what are all the things I need to get done before this baby arrives and changes my life? So one of the things that I don't remember how I found out about it is this half marathon, and I knew you were into running at least. I didn't know you did half marathons or marathons. And then, but you've always been my sort of like, if I have any ideas, I kind of like run it by you, or sort of try to get you in on it so that makes it happen. You absolutely made it happen last year.
That's just because I'm like your yes man. I'll just say yes to you no matter what you put in front of me.
Well, I'm hoping that you kind of, that's true, but hopefully there's good quality stuff coming. That's why you're saying yes. It's not just, total yes.
Right, for sure. So since you touched on it already, how's being a dad, a brand new dad?
It's amazing. It's life-changing, of course, and it's so much more, just kind of puts in perspective life, I think, and so much more about Ayan, my son, rather than now me, and when my wife and we used to have kind of like it used to be about us only, and now there's this new being, and we're totally responsible for him, and he's totally reliant on us. And it's sort of obvious, I know, but it didn't really click until he came along, and now he's 4 months, almost 5 months next week. Wow. So he's kind of developing his own personality. He has his own, like, you've seen the evolution over just 5 months. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been life changing, of course, and I feel like we we're kind of later in life that we sort of ended up having a baby, so it's sort of a long time coming in many ways.
Right.
It's been fun. It's not easy, but it's certainly been fun.
How far off do you think your expectations were when you were like thinking about having a baby, and what you were expecting versus reality?
That's a tough one. I think Saima was much more prepared. I think she kind of, had a little more perspective. I think even for my own nephews and nieces, I wasn't really, involved. I'm the youngest child in my family, so certainly mm-hmm. I go and visit, and I was there for all their parties. But certainly, baby caring was not part of my the things that I did. So all of that was like new for me, and I had to learn it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's about as expected, but I think no one can really prepare you until you get into it. So people tell you there's going to be sleepless nights, but I don't think you really understand until you're sort of in it, and it's still ongoing, and you're like, oh, wow, this is the real thing.
Is it like being on call continuously for the rest of your life?
It's harder because on call, certainly you've had call nights that you get breaks in between, right? Like you're not in charge of taking care of a patient, but if, for in the beginning, Ayan was kind of like our ICU patient because we had to keep track of I's and O's when he ate and how much he ate. And then, of course, you're sort of doing all the activities of daily living. You're feeding him, you're changing him, you're bathing him. So it's
Right.
ICU patient 24/7. It was all about him. The first, I took 6 weeks off. I took, sort of my vacation as a paternity leave, and it was really all about him. And my wife was recovering as well, so I had two patients for a while there. So I
Right.
think it's hard because it's literally 24/7. After a call shift, you go home and you post call and you can detox for a little while, but it just never ends here.
That's right. Do you think having two parents who are physicians or in healthcare was helpful at all?
I don't know the alternative, right? I only lived this reality, so I'm not sure. But I think certainly it helped, and I think I don't know if neither of us are pediatricians, so we were learning as we went along, but hopefully we were sort of able to keep things in check a little bit more. Both, it's always the new parent anxiety, but certainly we went through times of that. So I don't know, maybe it helped a little bit, but certainly neither of us knew anything about newborns, right? Because we're not pediatricians, so we were certainly doing the same thing that I think anybody would do: go to Google and look things up
Mm-hmm.
and call the pediatrician in the middle of the night for questions, and have tons of questions at the peds appointments because we're sort of trying to figure things out as well.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was anticipating you were going to say is like it just sort of strips you down of everything you know and kind of humbles you in a way that you can't really anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is very humbling. Like you think or you think you kind of have an idea of sort of how things are going to go, because that's pretty much, especially sort of in our field, we're all pretty type A going through medical school. We kind of have to have a ducks in a row to get through it, and residency, fellowship, and then now it is really unpredictable. I don't know what the day is going to be like, and how the evening is going to be like, because it's really guided by Ayan, about how he's doing, how he's feeling, and we haven't, knock on wood, haven't had to deal with sort of sickness or anything yet, like a flu or a virus. But I'm sure that'll come, and that'll be even more derailing. So
Right.
in a way, it's kind of freeing because I don't have any plans anymore, and I come home. I have no plans at all. I'm like,
You know what you're doing.
yeah, I was like, we'll see what happens. And if he goes to bed, then I'm like, oh, I guess I have a free hour now.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't go to bed, then I'm just taking care of him. But
Yeah, in a way
before
it
I would
becomes
have,
predictable.
yeah, before I would have all these like agendas that I was, okay, I'm gonna get home and get X, Y, and Z done. And now I
Right.
don't, including going to the gym. I no longer have that as an expectation.
So how do you work that in now? Are you still
Uh,
waking up in the morning?
I try, so it depends. Basically, it's like week by week now,
Yeah.
and it depends on my call. So, like last week, I had a night call, so I was able to go during the day, and then on my post call day, same thing today.
Nice.
Weekends, depending on how everything's going, I'm able to at least get downstairs during one of his long naps.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I have to be ready. So, this is nothing new, but it's just things that I've kind of discovered.
Right.
I change into my gym clothes first thing in the morning because I don't know when he's going to take the long nap. So I'm in gym clothes for a while during the day, and then I
Uh-huh.
put him down, and then I look at my wife. I'm like, okay, so you're okay. You think he's going to nap for a little bit? I'm going to go now, and
Nice.
then I no longer have the luxury of long warm ups and stretches and stuff. I'm going straight to the workout,
Hmm.
and many times I get called up, and I pause it and come up and then go back. I know for a fact, even a year ago, that would really be irritating because my workout is getting
Yeah.
up. But now it's like part of the expectation. So it's actually better in the sense that I do what I can. If I end the workout and it's not woken up yet, or my wife doesn't need me, I'm like, okay, well, that was a good workout.
Successful. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually,
Changes your whole expectation.
it really does. Yeah, it's all about the sort of the pre-expectation going in, and
Hmm.
that's been the big adjustment, I think, just to kind of balancing work and personal goals like running a half marathon and
Right.
having a baby at home.
Right. How's like the time management going with you and Sima now that you're both back at work? You guys are in daycare, or I should say, Ion's in daycare.
Ion's in daycare, yeah, absolutely. It's tough. Again, it's unpredictable. I think I went back to work at 6 or 7 weeks, so I kind of had to, like, Simon was at home for another 6 weeks or so. She was out for 3 months, so it's harder sort of transition. And certainly, I think, yeah, again, we knew it was going to be hard, so I think it's exactly as we expected in that sense. We've been lucky that the daycare is been good, and Ayan actually enjoys it. So when we drop him off, he's smiling, and we're picking up his smiling. So that has made it easier for us. I do see the value of weekends now, evenings and weekends for that matter, because before, again, it didn't really matter to me whether it was a weekday evening or a weekend evening. We would kind of just plan around it. But now with limited time that we have with Ayan, that as I said, I don't do any work at home now on the weekdays, and on the weekends I get things completely off and try to fit time for Ayan, because that's the only time we get extended times we get with him. And the
Right.
weekdays, many times his peak, his like best behavior is during daycare hours. And then I go pick him up in the evening, and then you're doing all the evening stuff, and the fun playtime is during the day. So I have to make the most of the weekends now to do that.
Yeah, I feel like I remember when you first came back to work, you said, I didn't used to understand how all of these people would be so excited to leave work and go
Yeah.
see their kids, but now I totally get it.
That's exactly right. I didn't understand when people were like in a rush, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. It's just another
Right.
15 minutes. But now I see the value of those 15 minutes. And same with weekend calls. Like I used to take a lot of weekend calls. Now I try not to, or at least I've certainly cut back quite a bit.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something that's always stuck with me when you came back.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's not groundbreaking in any way, and I'm sure especially people who have gone through it have have obviously realized this. But I think it's really hard. Like you can read all the books about parenting, and you can kind of prepare all you can, but until you're going through it, I don't think you really get that personal sort of the like the ideas about it, I guess. And
Hmm.
I found, yeah, a lot of things that I used to think were like silly or odd or not a big deal. I realize now that I'm like, oh no, actually, these kind of things do make a difference. And so yeah, I think it's made, humbling is the right word, and sort of
Yeah,
give a lot more slack now to everybody too, who have
right,
been going through this over the last few years that I just didn't have any appreciation for.
right. And you're in the department where people, a lot of the attendings are around your age and all have young kids. How do you feel like the cardiac department has been in terms of you going through this process?
Yeah, I think very supportive. Exactly as you said, I'm not the only one, and a lot of people have already been through it and are going through it. Many of our colleagues are sort of in this sort of phase in life, and so actually, I feel like it's very easy for me to even talk about it at work. I ask for advice all the time from my colleagues who've just recently been through this. One of my colleagues, Caroline Hunter, just gave me a book about sleeping, getting the baby to sleep a little bit more. And I haven't quite made it through reading it, but I have it. But those kind of things, like it's very easy for me to. I feel lucky that I have people I can talk to and get advice from, and everything sort of leading up to this, I've gotten advice from our colleagues as well, including the daycare that we go to is the same one that our colleagues go to, and when we were choosing to buy a house, we chose a location based on the advice we got. So yeah, our department I feel like is unique in that sense that everyone's younger, and sort of family life. It's okay to talk about our work and get advice about, and people help each
Hmm.
other out. Certainly, I try to do that too. I'm now the recipient of the help, and before I would be the one to say, hey, I'll pick up your shift. You're, for whatever reason you need to get out early, I'll take your call, things like that.
I feel like the other cool thing about your department is that that type of advice giving like bleeds into the operating room and like sort of lends itself to medical advice. And you're the room 23 and 24 are the few rooms where you see colleagues and other attendings come into the room, interpret echoes, and just kind of like chit chat about how the case is going. And so, as someone who was like first starting off their cardiac rotations, it was just so fascinating to hear two attendings just talking about a case. What goes through your mind when I say things like that? Like, can you put yourself in a situation like that?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think part of it is the subspecialty itself, cardiac. When we are in the case, we do guide the surgical care. So most of the time, most of the scenarios where we call for help and sort of have other second opinions is when the anesthesia provider is going to make a decision that's going to affect the consequence of the case. So whether it's should we repair or replace this valve, or is this repair or replacement adequate? Does this need to be readjusted, or is this going to be okay? And I think anesthesiologists are not usually in those positions where they kind of in the general anesthesia world where they ultimately determine the surgical progress. So I think because of that, it's sort of in a unique place, and our department our division is very strong, and we have very talented folks like Andy Maslow and Herb Chen, and they've done this for a long time, and they know their stuff. So I feel when I first started here, I was new attending and sort of 3 years out of fellowship, so I was still very new and kind of honing my own skills. So having that backup and knowing that I could call for help and have them sort of be my support, really, because they review it with us, and I learn from them, and they kind of help me make a better decision. I think that is very unique to cardiac. I don't think you don't see. You're right. I didn't think of that. I don't see it elsewhere, but I think that's important because that's kind of how we have supportive work environments. And I know that I have a backup. I know I have someone I can call if I'm not sure, and I feel comfortable doing it because the help I'm going to get is going to be very good as well. I think that helps to create better work environments. I think we should all really be doing that. And I think for the most part, our department is pretty good about asking for help and people kind of helping each other out rather than creating this sort of solo provider, like, oh, it's your case, you figure it out. I don't think I've really come across that in our department. And I think that's really should be the norm everywhere. It should be that we help each other out and provide support, clinical support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of humility, I think, in anesthesia, and especially when emergencies come up. And actually, like as you were just describing that too, I'm thinking in my head, all of the simulations that we're a part of are basically designed for it to be one provider for the first few minutes, and then you almost immediately call for help and have colleagues come in and help you. So the way we're training people is really designed to ask for help when emergencies come up.
Yeah, I think it's old school teaching. Like back in the day, perhaps, the physician was this, sole decision maker and lone provider. I think really in every field now we're moving towards a more team-based approach. Because, just the wealth of information now, it's not possible for one individual to really take everything in. And I think the more we can sort of get help, and not just other physicians, but even, so other providers that are involved in the care, not only will we get better care, sort of better patient outcomes, but I think it's even a sort of a treatment for like preventing burnout, because then one person doesn't feel solely responsible for everything. And it should be normal to be able to ask, the people around, it's like, is there any other things that we're missing? Anything, any other advice? And people should have that ability to speak up.
Yeah, it's a really good point about burnout. Reduces your overall stress load throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I also want to touch on in terms of cardiac is you, Jeff Hayward, and Devin Flaherty started this initiative probably a couple years ago now with our echo teaching and our echo curriculum. What inspired you guys to do that, and how do you think it's going so far?
Yeah, that's something we've been doing, I think, 3 years now. Probably your class was the first class that had that, and we've continued it since. So even the current CA1s will be starting that in January. I think as part of cardiac, what makes cardiac anesthesia unique is the TE certification. So unlike any other subspecialty, any other sort of general anesthesia provider, we actually train in TEs, we get certified, and we are certified to do TE around the OR. So it's a perioperative certification. So we're not cardiologists by no means, but we do the same sort of role within the OR setting. So diagnosis and treatment and assessment of cardiac function. So it's such a unique part of cardiac that's really what cardiac fellowship ends up being all about, the TE training. So it's very common that people come out of that being very excited about echo because it's a completely brand new skill. And in my residency, I mean, I learned a little bit of it, but certainly not to the extent that I learned when I came out as a fellow. So it's not uncommon that cardiac fellows come out, being all excited about TE and wanting to share that information with the residents. And I think we got lucky in the sense that the ASA released this POCUS curriculum. So there's been a push for point of care ultrasound, and that's surface ultrasound, TTE, as well as lung and gastric, as you know. But the hardest part, if you ask any generalist, will be the cardiac portion of it. And given our TE background, it's kind of easier for us to sort of, flip everything around and think about it in terms of TTE. So, when that POCUS curriculum came around, and, we'd all kind of individually done a lot of work in terms of either TTE or TE teaching. So we came together and decided to put a sort of integrated curriculum, all three of us together, where I think it's unique in terms of our resident lecturers. You can correct me, where we have three different stations. We have a TE simulator, a TTE model, and then slides where we go over pathology, because you won't see pathology in the simulator or model as easily. Mm-hmm. So all three of us are there, and we sort of divide you guys up and go to different stations and learn it, and sort of try to learn it all together rather than individually. So I think it's going really well. For the most part, most residents seem to enjoy it a lot. It is a kind of niche field, so it's not everyone's bread and butter, but folks who are going to cardiac or an ICU, this is going to be very relevant. And ultimately, I think within 5 years, even a generalist will be expected to do point of care ultrasound.
Yeah, ultimately, definitely,
it's going to be relevant to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the POCUS stuff, like you said.
Yeah. And I mean, ASA is pushing big time for it with the POCUS certification, and they have a lot of POCUS workshops at the ASA itself that, I've participated in as well. And more and more, ASA is pushing towards us becoming experts at POCUS so that we can guide clinical care using ultrasound as a tool.
Mm-hmm. Why did you go into cardiac anesthesia in the first place?
I liked the procedures. I liked the the TE aspect of it. But originally, I went into anesthesia, wanting to do ICU. My brother is an ICU doc, so I kind of been influenced by him. And then I just ended up not liking the sort of ICU rounds and the sort of peripheral work that goes with ICU.
Who would ever go into ICU?
It's shocking. I still get amazed. But to each their own. We do need ICU docs, so right. So I found cardiac anesthesia being ICU in the OR. So it had the best parts of ICU with the complex physiology, sick patients, procedures, TE, TTE, and just not having to deal with the stuff that I didn't really enjoy as much. So that's kind of what pulled me towards cardiac.
Are there particular cases that you like doing now in cardiac, like TAVRs versus open hearts versus thoracic?
I think the mix is really what's important. I wouldn't want to do one or any one of those only, because I think that variety is important just to kind of keep my mind engaged and thinking about different types of physiology and different pathology. So each case has its own unique aspect to it, and certainly from a TE perspective, it's really only the open hearts that we can do that in. So yeah, I do enjoy all the variety. I mean, there's never going to be, if anyone's saying their job is perfect and they love every single day, they're probably lying to you. So every no matter what, like there's going to be some days that are great and some days that are not. It's not so much about the case; it's usually about what else is going on. But I do enjoy doing the cardiac cases. I enjoy the TAVR room, and the thoracic room is great, and especially nowadays we're doing a lot more, and the open hearts that keep coming through. When I was at University of Chicago, we did a lot more of heart transplants, lung transplants, things like that. We don't do that here, and I don't mind that, as that's sort of a unique aspect in and of itself. But certainly our calls tend to be better when you don't do transplants in the middle of the night. So
right.
That was kind of one of those like decisions I had to make when I was choosing a job, and I didn't mind taking a job that didn't have those. Sort of, while I miss those cases, I don't miss doing them in the middle of the night.
Especially probably now as a new dad.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I should give my 2 or 3 years ago give myself kudos, because now I appreciate it even more.
Exactly. And you're a medical student here at Brown, correct?
That's correct. Yes, I'm D12.
Do you remember anyone in the department when you were a medical student here?
Absolutely. In fact, funny stories. Like right after I started, I sat down with Fred Rodenberg, and and I don't expect him to, of course, remember me, given the number of medical students that go through with him. But he's like one of the most popular attendings. He has his own personal anesthesia rotation where students just shadow him. While I did not do that particular rotation, during my regular anesthesia rotation, I spent some days with Dr. Rodenberg. And I went up to him and said, you are the reason that I went into cardiac anesthesia, because I still remember I was with him in the cardiac room and he went over all this cardiac physiology, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then not only did I go into anesthesia, I went to cardiac anesthesia, and then I was part of the cardiac group, and Dr. Rodenberg had just stepped down. So basically had in essence, taken up his spot in the cardiac group. And he looked at me like, wow, so medical students are now his colleagues. And, it's amazing the amount of impact he's had over the years, to Brown med students, because for the longest time, we did not have a residency.
Right.
So we had very little exposure to anesthesia and really didn't really understand what, as medical students, what an anesthesia residency would be. So if it wasn't for Dr. Rodenberg, there'd be, I'm sure there's generations of Brown anesthesia or Brown med students who ended up going to anesthesia who owe it to Dr. Rodenberg, and I'm certainly one of them.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah, it really is. And I told him about it too, and he's like, I need to retire. But he's still with us. He's still working with us. I think he's retiring soon.
He is very much still with us. Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. I was just in the EP with him a couple of days ago.
That's right. Yeah, but he's great. I mean, he continues to be heavily engaged in med student teaching and resident teaching, and it's a pleasure having learned from him, and I still learn from him. And I clearly remember him, and there are a few others that have, many of them who've now retired, but he was one of those who has like this lasting impact on me as a med student. And then I got to work with him as an attending, so I got very lucky.
Yeah, very cool. And before you're at Brown, you're at Clark University?
Clark University, that's right. It's a small
track star?
Not track. I was not a track star. I was actually a swimmer at Clark.
Swimmer. Right.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah, being from Kenya, you would think I would be a track star, but that's your classic nature versus nurture story. So no, I did not run. In fact, I never ran until I went to Chicago. But I swam there, and that's right. It was amazing. I mean, Clark is the middle of nowhere in Worcester, Mass, and I came from Kenya, and ended up at Clark, and it was one of those like life-changing experiences there. And I met my wife Saima there, so I have to say it was the sort of best
pivotal moment of your life.
Absolutely.
What year did you guys meet? Freshman year?
Yeah, a few months in.
Nice. And how do you end up in Worcester, Massachusetts from Kenya?
It's $1 million question.
This is an intermission. We're about halfway through the episode. Feel free to pause it, give yourself a mental break, and come back to it later. If your commute's not over or you're really into the episode, feel free to keep pushing forward. But if you need to take a break here and reset yourself, go ahead, put the podcast down, and come back to it at a later time. It does seem like most of the guests save their best for last, so you'll be sure to want to check out the rest of the podcast and the end of the episode to see what everyone has to say.
So, a couple different factors. So when I was in Kenya, I was actually in the British system of schooling, and I did the British system, which is the A-level of the GCSE system, and it basically lines us up to go to university in the UK. But right as I was getting close towards, we call it Form 5, which would, I guess, be 11th grade here, we won the diversity lottery and the US green card lottery. My parents randomly applied, and it's like one of those 1 in a million chance of winning it. And we happened to win it the year that I was about to get ready to graduate. So it was like, perfect timing in that sense. So I still remember my dad sitting, I came home for lunch, because that's what we do in Kenya. Everybody goes home to have lunch. And I came home from school. My dad's like, here's a letter from the U.S. Department of State. Condoleezza Rice had signed this letter saying, congratulations, you can come to America now as a green card holder. I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, I don't know. Like, what are you showing, 16 years old, not planning to go to the UK to study, and then he shows me this. That really shifted trajectory for me. And I still remember when I started, the process of applying, because in the UK, after you finish high school, you go straight to medical school. So of course, I didn't know any better, so I started applying to medical schools in the US as I was finishing up high school, and I realized, oh wait, I need a bachelor's degree first, so I gotta, almost as an afterthought, start applying to all these bachelor programs. So I applied everywhere, and then Clark was just one of those I got into, and my brother happened to be doing his residency in Worcester, which is why I ended up at Clark. So yeah, it was kind of it was just fate. It was just meant to be that I would end up at Clark. Clark actually does have a large international population. It's very small, about 2,000, and probably had like 200 kids from, international per class. I don't know if it's different now, but back then I was actually not the only one from Kenya. There were like 10 other people from Kenya. There's a bunch more people from, Asia and India and other parts of Africa as well.
And you were born in Kenya, correct?
Yes, I was born in Mombasa, Kenya.
So did your parents come from India and to Kenya?
Yeah. So again, sort of complicated story. So my great grandfather, my mom's side, actually moved to Madagascar from India and got
Oh,
married in Tanzania to my grandmother. And then my mom was born in Tanzania, but then they moved to Mombasa and then they lived there. So my mom is actually from Kenya. She went to school in Kenya and did it kind of like me. But my dad's side is actually from India. So my parents, my mom went to India to study, met my dad, and they moved to Kenya after. So I'm actually
got it.
second and third generation Kenyan on my mom's side. My mom has very strong ties to Kenya and
Cool.
still continues to. They actually still live there. They still live in Kenya, and we try to go when we can.
And you've kind of been able to take this international background of yours and apply it to your current job.
Yeah, I mean, it's you say international background, but it's really that is me. You know what I mean? That's the only thing I knew. Like when I grew up in Kenya, I didn't know that was normal, right? Like I was growing up, and this is what I thought. This is all that I knew, so I didn't really know. It wasn't unique to me when I was growing up in Kenya. I know now when I say, "Oh yeah, I was born and raised in Kenya," that's unique. But at the time, that was normal. Only every other person I knew was only from Kenya. So yeah, so I kind of born and raised there, and I kind of was part of the system and was I worked because I was interested in medicine. I was volunteering at the hospital there. Coast General Hospital is a public hospital in Mombasa. And as you can imagine, not very well. Like as a volunteer, they would just let me do whatever I wanted. So I was a high school student and I was in the emergency department. So I did, whatever menial tasks they needed. But when a patient would come in and needed some suturing, I still remember the charge nurse said, "There's nobody available to suture." And she handed me, this is a high school student, I've not even done any of this stuff, hands me the sutures. Like, go ahead and stitch this patient out. That was
How'd it go? How'd it go?
I couldn't do it. I mean, I kind of I don't really know what I'm doing here, and I felt sick to my stomach, and I told the sergeant, I'm like,
Oh my God,
please,
that's amazing.
please find someone who actually is capable of doing this because this poor patient is like,
Where was the laceration?
I was on the head.
Nice.
I mean, these are the things you don't forget. So it was a prisoner who
Of
was
course.
trying to escape, and they had it's called a panga in Swahili or a machete, and the police officer struck him in the head with it. So you had a
Wow.
big back, you could see the cranium underneath, and the guy was so stoic and didn't move. And I think that was part of the reason why they handed it to me too. It was just sort of a not a VIP or any means. So they're like, okay, who is the lowest on the totem pole? That would be the high school volunteer. So they're like, so she's like telling me, go and suture this patient up, and I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna work. It's like I don't even know how to work this needle,
Yeah.
just fraught with issues. But those kind of experiences, and then I did it in high school, and I went back while I was in college. Every time I would go to Kenya, I would go volunteer. I did an eye clinic volunteering where we would go to rural parts of Mombasa and perform eye exams. So this is
Hmm.
a little more that I could do because I was a first year medical student at the time. It's through this organization called Lions Club, which is actually an international organization, has an American standing.
Hmm.
We would go and perform eye exams, and rural parts where it was amazing to see the patients would not be able to see, usually due to aging, they weren't able to read. And then we would put glasses in front of them and you could just see the joy in their eyes. They're like, oh my gosh, I can read now, I can see now. And it was just like instant,
Miracle.
yeah, it was like a miracle to them. And it was like such a simple sort of move that we did. And the whole goal was to try to treat cataracts. So what they would do is, identify patients with cataract, bring them over to the city, Mombasa, and perform free surgery. So not only did I do the outreach part, I was also sort of helping out with the surgical part. And those experiences really kind of stayed with me. And since then, I've been trying to find a way to kind of do something small. I'm not trying to solve sort of major issues, but sometimes when you see these big problems, it's so daunting that you feel like there's nothing you can do that'll make a difference.
Right.
So I try to sort of break it down to something that I can control, so that there's something that I can contribute, a small step, and then perhaps they'll kind of, flourish, and then there'll be more people like me who will be doing similar things. So I try to find simple ways to try to sort of give back and go back there and sort of, practice anesthesia, teach anesthesia, which
Hmm.
is what we're going to be doing when we go to Rwanda.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the Rwanda trip. So this is going to be your second year going. How did you first get involved?
So this, I was saying, I've kind of always been looking to get involved in sort of global health anesthesia. It was hard during residency, although I did apply to a global international anesthesia residence scholarship. That's what it was called. I did not get in. This was back when I was at University of Chicago. But of course, it's funny how things kind of work out because when I became an attending, I applied to be in the Global Health Committee at the American Society of Anesthesiology, so the ASA Committee on Global Health. And they're actually the ones that sponsored the resident scholarship. So it was 2020, middle of the pandemic, and I was just part of the committee and listening in and contributing where I could and looking for opportunities because that's really where it was. And an opening came up where they had an overseas training program in Rwanda, and they were looking for someone to lead it. So I applied, and sheer luck or sort of my background, they're like, oh, this would be actually a good fit given me being from Kenya, and Kenya and Rwanda are neighboring countries. In fact, a lot of people in Rwanda speak Swahili, which is the national language in Kenya. So it was a good fit. It wasn't perfect. I was looking to go to Kenya, but it was one of those like, sometimes best is not, better is better than best, right? So
Right.
the opportunity that I could get, and that's how I, got involved. And since then, I'm now in charge of organizing American volunteers to go to Rwanda to teach the residents. So there's a anesthesia residency program at the University of Rwanda, and we send volunteers every month from some from Canada, some from the US, and we're in charge of teaching. So we do intraoperative teaching, the same thing we do here. Go to the ORs, whatever case is going on. We help them teach clinical knowledge during the procedure, and then they have academic time where they do lectures. So we help teach lectures, simulation, and yeah, it was a great trip. So my first trip was last year. We went with a couple of residents, and it's amazing, the kind of impact you can have. And I'm not doing anything sort of out of this world. I'm basically doing the same thing I do here and talk about the same stuff. It's one of the things that stood out to me was how similar their practice was to what we do here. They induce with propofol. Yes, they have thiopentanol, but they use propofol for the most part if it's available. And so their airway management techniques are similar. They have a glide scope. They don't use it as much, but it's available. So we try to sort of encourage them to try all these different techniques and teach them the basics because we were with the CA1 residents. So it's very much like teaching a fresh resident in the States. And for the senior residents, we did some advanced things like POCUS ultrasound. So they have ultrasound machines, so we were able to work with the senior residents in the ICU and do some cardiac lung ultrasound. So it's basically the same thing that I do here, and I just kind of do it with the University of Rwanda residents.
Let's pretend for a second I'm a fourth year medical student who's looking to go into anesthesia, and I'm thinking about different residency programs, and I'm considering going to Brown because I know that they have an international elective. What could you tell me about how it's going to impact my residency experience and my potential future career going forward?
I'll take a step back because first thing I would say is that you have to choose a program based on sort of your own needs. So, I say location tends to be the most important thing. So all this other stuff is actually great. But if you're not going to be happy at the program, whether it's because you're far away from family or you don't like the area that it's in, probably doesn't really matter what other cool stuff they have. So I'm obviously faculty advisor for the medical school anesthesia interest group and the preclinical elective. So I do have these conversations a lot. And I talk about, that's kind of where I say, it's like, you have to first look internally and decide for yourself whether or not a certain area, location or program is a good fit for you. Once you've decided that, then you can kind of sort of look at the more details. So I think Brown is unique in that it has not only has this international program, but has sort of many opportunities. Because as a fourth year student, you don't really know where your interests are going to be by the time you're a CA3 resident. This is obviously a senior elective.
Totally.
So you don't know, maybe this is not something that you like, that you may not like, and maybe you like something else, like whether it's research or, bioinformatics or, some other sort of branch of anesthesia. So, again, deciding solely on something like a CA3 elective is, sort of kind of far-fetched. But if you do end up at a place like this, yeah, exactly, you get to go. Unfortunately, we haven't, who knows what's going to happen in 3 years, but this time it's limited. So we're not, it's not like every resident can go. So when the residents that do in fact go, I think it just gives you perspective about, global health and sort of care worldwide. We get very siloed in our own world here, and we don't realize the need that may exist elsewhere. I think it affects my own practice, simple things like trying to minimize waste and trying to, sort of appreciate sort of the resources that you do have, because not everywhere else these resources exist. And just being thoughtful about, the impact we can have. So simple things like providing, education and lectures to, folks in Rwanda. And Rwanda is just one program. There's probably programs in, many different areas of need. So if we sit in the U.S. and kind of keep things to ourselves, then, you're not really helping sort of the global, global anesthesia needs. So I think just being cognizant and sort of, because many times, again, this is not obvious. It becomes obvious once you kind of like look into it, but it's not top of mind. So we don't think about it much. So, you sit back as a new attending or a senior resident being like, oh, I don't think I can have any impact. I'm just a lowly resident in my program and I'm not doing any, there's nothing I can do that's going to make a difference, which is just not true. So sometimes just it opens your eyes to the other kinds of opportunities that are out there. And much of global health tends to be volunteering. So it has to come intrinsically, it has to come from the person who says, okay, I want to commit my time, and whether it's, you don't even have to travel. And global health really starts local. So, certainly Rwanda and, parts of Africa are in need, but sometimes even, in certain parts of Providence, there is need for, healthcare education and, providing sort of access to care. So it doesn't have to go far. So I think these kind of electives just open your eyes to the opportunities that are out there, things that you can do. And again, we can't solve the world's problems, and as individuals, but certainly we can do our part, small steps, and then again, as an aggregate, hopefully we'll make the world a better place for everyone to live in.
That was a really good answer. I really appreciated how you took a global concept and had us bring it locally, and how we can think about disparities on a local perspective, which I think is a really powerful thing.
Absolutely. And I think when I think about it, I do think about it in a local perspective, but I do think about it when I was back in Kenya and sort of what I witnessed. And I live here now, and of course I'm, sort of thinking, now from the US perspective, but when I was I still think back to sort of my experiences there. So someone who doesn't have an international background, but and from their own town, whether it's in a city or town, there is healthcare needs there as well. So you don't have to go as far as Rwanda and Kenya. You can just sort of find opportunities locally, and I think Brown is very good at that. The university, the undergrad, and the sort of grad school does have these kind of opportunities. So being at a place like Brown with such a strong sort of university. Mm-hmm. Find these kind of opportunities is just, you have to step up and you have to have the interest to kind of lead these kind of things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Last thing I want to touch on in your career is something outside of medicine, which you haven't really incorporated yet into your career, but your MBA degree, which you've gotten over the past couple of years. One, what motivated you to get that? And two, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, I think it informs sort of my daily sort of decision making and things. It's MBA. I feel like sometimes it's just a way of thinking. Sort of gives you sort of different perspectives. So again, going back to when I was in Kenya, going through the GCSE system, we choose our track of arts versus science very early. So I was probably 15 years old when I had to make a decision: am I going to do sciences or am I going to do arts? So I decided sciences, of course, and the only classes I took for the last 2 or 3 years while I was there was, biology, chemistry, physics, and statistics, and mathematics, all these sort of STEM things. So when I came to college, I thought that was normal. That's what people did where I was. And I came to college and I realized, wait a second, I can do these other kinds of classes. I can learn about healthcare economics. That's a class I took when I was at Clark. Psychology and, finance. I didn't even know that was an option for me. But of course, in undergrad, I was so focused on getting into med school that I continued to do classes in that. in science, but Clark, being a liberal arts school, forces you to take classes beyond your own primary field. So I had to take a class in English. I did an English poetry class, and I did philosophy class. It was philosophy of love, interestingly enough. And my econ class was healthcare economics. So those kind of things I didn't even know were an option when I was
How did you do in those classes? How did you do in philosophy of love and
I
English?
think, pre-med, yes, it's about the stuff you learn, but it's really about how good of a test taker and how good of a
True,
studier you are, like how well you can
true.
study and focus in on the details. This, when people are like 4.0 GPAs and pre-med, doesn't mean that they're well-rounded. They're just good at studying and good at taking exams. And I was definitely that person. So
Uh-huh.
I did well, but not because of I learned anything. It's just because I knew what I needed to do, and I could sit in the library for hours and hours and get the stuff done. So, but I think those, then I went to medical school, and of course everything kind of, sort of goes haywire. So I was always interested in finance and economics, and sort of I was always kind of keeping reading things and sort of keeping myself, sort of trying to educate myself. But it was really in residency that I still remember I was a CA2. My wife just matched into her neurology residency in Chicago. I was at University of Chicago, so I knew I was going to, after fellowship, come back to Chicago for at least a year or 2 years. And I had just starting CA3 year. I was not selected to be chief resident, so I had CA3 year where I had to kind of make a decision. I was like, am I just going to be just go through CA3 year doing what I was doing there anyway, and sort of excelling in the anesthesia part of things, and or was I going to try to sort of venture out and do something differently? And I think by being at University of Chicago, which has a very strong business school, and knowing that I was going to come back to Chicago, that's when I decided I'll take the GMAT and sort of branch out. So I decided, I studied for that, took the exam during my CA3 year, applied during fellowship year, and got into business school that I started as a first year attending. So I did it part time, and I learned a lot. And I think ever since I finished, it's just sort of changed, again, how I make daily decisions. It gives me more of a long-term perspective. I certainly use it for personal finance reasons, but you don't need an MBA for that, whether it's for myself or the lectures that I give the medical students. I don't know what the long-term plan is. This is one of those, I was listening to a podcast, and Atul Gawande said, before age 40, you should just say yes to everything, because you don't really know what you like, and you haven't been exposed to a lot of things. And then once you're doing it, you realize whether or not you're enjoying it. If you enjoy it, you keep doing it. And if you don't enjoy it, then you should stop.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things that I kind of just wanted to get exposed and sort of get a sense of what it was like. And I do enjoy it, and I continue to keep up with it. I don't know where it's going to take me. I think it's one of those like 5 or 10 year plans that, in the future, having a sort of business degree certainly helps. And hopefully, I'll sort of start incorporating it as well. But even if I don't do any of that stuff, I can, just the knowledge alone, I think is worth, sometimes you just want to learn things for the curiosity of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And running your own personal finance saves you enough money that you can pay for the MBA multiple times over the course of your career.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The other point you made, it just kind of impacts the way you make everyday type decisions. I'm sure it's just a different way of evaluating risks and benefits.
Absolutely. I think it gives you a bigger, like a sort of more long-term perspective is really what it is. Like a lot of medical school, med school residency is short-term. What am I going to do next year? What's my next fellowship? You're sort of very focused on kind of your short-term things. And when we become attendings, we don't really know sometimes what people get lost, because every time there was a path. Like when you were a first year resident, you were figuring out what fellowship you want to do, and then you're going to go to that fellowship. And after fellowship, you're going to be an attending, and now you're an attending, and there's nothing. What's next? There's nothing,
Right.
right? Like you're just an attending forever now. And I think having this sort of extra skill set, I guess, or extra thought process, or sort of an outside perspective, I think helped me kind of like work through that a little bit better. And I think, again, you don't need to do an MBA for it. I think I did the MBA because I was at University of Chicago. I was going to be able to go to a strong business school. I did a part-time program, so I could do it in person. But you can certainly, people can learn it on their own, whether it's books or courses. There's so many resources now online, including podcasts. And But it's just one of those things that you have to have that interest, and it has to be intrinsic. If you're interested in it, I think it's worthwhile, and certainly you can gain a lot from it.
Right. And it's probably not fair of me to say that you don't use it, because you give the lectures. You give the lectures to medical students. I think we've talked about maybe even talking to residents a little bit about it. But it's definitely a missing pillar in medical education of just like simple finance literacy, and future planning. And I feel like having somebody with a background like yourself to lecture medical students or even residents can be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, I mean, people have made careers out of this, right? Like you can go online and find people who literal job is personal finance education directed towards medical professionals. And so I can't solve large problems. I start small. So I give sort of 3 hour workshop to the fourth year medical students. I'd love to give one to the residents too. So maybe you can help me sort of make that happen before you graduate. And then, yeah, and then again, it sort of builds from there. So, I've already had a few other attendings who have shown interest, and then, I can sort of incorporate them and make it in, there are places that have personal finance type curriculums that last a semester at the med school level, starting from first year. And that's really when you want to start this. So I've started small, but hopefully over the years it will kind of build on itself. But again, you don't need an MBA for any of this stuff, but it certainly helps and certainly gives you that credibility, so that when I stand in front of them and I say, "Oh yes, University of Chicago booth, MBA," so that's why you should listen.
Bolsters you, bolsters you.
Yeah, so I guess then people are like, "Oh, I guess I should listen to what he has to say." It's not just another conversation you're having in the break room.
Right, getting like your father's friend's advice about how to manage your money.
Yeah, or even worse, it's like, trust me, it's like when this whole Bitcoin and meme stock craze was going on. It was just nonstop, even maybe in the resident lounge, but certainly in the attending lounge. I was like, no, no, I know this is the way it's going to be. Like, okay, well,
yeah.
Yeah, in a bull market, everyone's going to win. But now, when times are in the bear market, people are like, oh, okay, actually, I guess I didn't really know what was going on.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I think it just kind of gives me that perspective and sort of that background knowledge that you can sort of work through it, so you can control yourself during those times.
Yeah, I have no doubt that's going to take you. You're going to use it somehow, or you're already using it, like I said. But if anything, I think fulfilling that thirst for education is so valuable.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's something completely different to me. Like, there are many people who do finance degrees and stuff in college, then who kind of have that knowledge, but I didn't. So I wanted to kind of learn it, and now it's just up to me to kind of keep it up. Again through blogs and books and podcasts and things like that. And yeah, I mean, again, the opportunities are limitless, and as you have shown yourself, the only thing restricting is usually your own thought process and yourself. It's always self-limiting beliefs, and these are the things that kind of open your mind to say that there is other things that you can do. And I enjoy clinical medicine, so I'm in no rush to certainly get out of that. So if that was something I didn't enjoy, then I would have that option of saying, you know what, I'm going to stop doing what I don't enjoy and perhaps start something of my own, or do consulting. And MD, MBAs get consulting positions very easily, and get consulting positions. So it just gives me that other option. So any day that I feel like clinical medicine is not doing it for me, or if I'm not able to keep up with it.
See you guys later. I'm pretty valuable.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it gives you those options. I mean, sometimes it's good to have those options. And,
I love it.
Just knowing, it's just about the knowledge, about knowing what's out there, and
right.
What else you can do.
What your worth is.
What your worth is, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Dr. Asher. This has been awesome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for including me.
Of course. I see a lot of myself in you. And it's funny, Lillian asked me like why you were going to be the first one, because she was like, he wasn't the first one you interviewed. And I was like, well, I had some intentionality in how I ordered everything, really just a couple people. But you're one of like a few people besides myself who like encourages me to do this stuff and like keep going with it. So I had to pay my dues and pay my respect to you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, this is very motivating that you kind of do this as well. And, our stories are not, especially it's just true, which is why I kind of enjoy what you're doing, because even the 10 minutes that I heard about Maslow, there's like more things that are common about people than not. We just focus on what's different. So even those 10 minutes I heard, I could hear things that, sort of I could relate to. And things like this kind of, I think, bring that sort of commonality a little bit more. So yeah, there's more in common between what you go through and what I've been going through, and the decisions you made, and sort of the things that I had to do. So
absolutely,
I'm glad that you kind of stepped up and said, you know what, it doesn't matter what, this is what I want to do and this is what I enjoy. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what everyone else says, or it doesn't matter what the standard traditional path of things is. I'm going to sort of carve my own. So kudos to you for doing that. Thank you for including me in this. Hopefully it lives up to your expectations.
It's gonna go viral.
If it goes viral, yeah, exactly. Well, actually, it'll go viral in Kenya too. I'll send it to all.
Oh, perfect! It's gonna go internationally viral.
Look at this guy now, right?
Yeah.
Right. But, yeah, no, I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to support you and sort of all your endeavors, not only now but even in the future. So don't forget about us when you're a big shot ICU doctor. It's interesting kind of thinking. You took me down memory lane sometimes. Like, oh yeah, back in the day.
It's fun. It's very fun.
It is kind of fun.
All right, man. Awesome. Good chatting with you. I'll see you in person soon.
Hang out again. Come by sometime when you guys.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Behind the Drapes. If you like what you hear, check out the podcast homepage where you can check out other episodes that have been released, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you get all the new episodes to your homepage as they drop. Also, if you like the educational stuff, check out the Instagram page and the TikTok page, Keywords by Kenny, and also the website keywordsxkenny.com to see some more full in-depth explanations for keyword topics.